So hello everyone and welcome to today's SANS webcast. Not sure that you need OT cybersecurity? A Sentryo assessment can quickly provide the data and guidance that you need. Sponsored by Sentryo. My name is Carol Auth of SANS and I will be moderating today's webcast. Actually, that's not true. Tim Conway is going to be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are, as I said, Tim Conway, Technical Director, ICS and SCADA Programs at SANS. Michael Thompson, Chief Engineering and Technology Officer, AWC Inc., and Bob Foley, Vice President of North America for Sentryo. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Tim.
Hi, Carol. Thank you. Appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Yes, thanks.
All right. I understand you got to do that intro twice, so I'm sure it was better the second time around.
Yeah, something went awry there. All right.
Yes. All right. Thank you all for joining. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. I'm sure if you are involved in industrial control systems, operational technology, and cybersecurity, you all have a lot on your plate and a lot of things to do. Across the three speakers that we have, I will be kind of kicking off this talk and then turning it over to Bob. There's a whole bunch of information that we have to communicate, so we're going to move pretty quickly, and we want to try to make sure we have time for some of your questions as well. But you do not have to wait to the end for your questions. While Bob and Michael are presenting, I'll be looking at the questions coming in, taking my best shot at answering them, and queuing up ones for Bob and Michael at the end of their talks. With that, we'll move straight into it. Some of the areas as I looked through the Sentryo product, some of their capabilities, kind of current challenges within industrial control system space, and some of the things that I hear from our students in our classes that they're looking for solutions, they're looking for answers on some very specific items. I've kind of looked at these trends across this space, and as many of you are aware, in kind of our plant floor environments and in our field environments, we're starting to add more and more and more cyber-enabled devices within our operational technology space that is absolutely providing additional visibility, additional capability on the operational side, and providing great benefit, but specifically just from a cybersecurity perspective, that is also adding some new risk and some new vulnerabilities to manage and some new attack vectors to be aware of. So kind of that top row where you're seeing kind of this trend moving more into a risk trend of things to be concerned about. The additional and growing cyber-enabled OT devices is something that you definitely want to be tracking in your organizations and be aware of. Right below that, kind of as we add more systems and we interconnect those systems and they become interdependent to each other, again, that is adding complexity to these environments, but it's also adding some great capability where now you have visibility from multiple geographies, multiple buildings, multiple facilities, so people can do some analytics and some performance tuning as well as some dispatch in some types of sectors, and reporting and additional kind of financial analysis. But having that interconnectedness outside of that traditional plant floor or outside of the traditional OT environment is also kind of moving you to the right in additional risks that you need to be aware of and managing. This third row, whether you're working directly in a regulatory space or you are an IT or an OT professional, this is becoming something that is hard to escape. Whether you work directly with the regulation or with compliance or with audits, or you are a practitioner that is performing tasks that are required by the various standards and regulations depending on what geography you're in, you are finding that the level of care and the level of performance is only increasing every day, every minute on what you need to do and how well you need to do it. And in some regulatory environments like NERC-CIP, it is something that you need to do continuously and in a way where you have zero deficiencies. As soon as there is some level of miss or some level of an issue, you have compliance problems to report. So that is absolutely a trend that is continuing to move from a regulatory risk perspective. But the idea behind those regulations is to move up your cyber capabilities so that you're trying to counter the other risks on this table with the additional OT devices, the additional interdependence and interconnectedness. Those individual controls and standards frameworks are trying to mitigate some of those growing risks, but definitely the regulatory risk is on the rise. Over my career and kind of in the last 5 years, this item here, this targeted industrial control system cyber attack risk, that is something that a decade ago we used to talk about, and we'd look to IT specific attacks, and we'd talk about how they could be pointed towards and impact operational technologies and industrial control system environments. And over the last 5 years specifically, we've really seen a sharp increase in legitimate events that have happened that are public knowledge and case studies to go out and do analysis of and lessons learned for individual asset owners and operators to see that this is a growing risk area, and system architectures and asset management really need to be focused on so you can begin to manage this and mitigate it. All 4 of those you'll see are kind of moving over to the right, where kind of in a collection, all 4 of those things are moving towards a space that becomes a concerning area in kind of the cyber to physical world, where these types of attacks could cause a physical impact, a physical event, resulting in equipment damage or a human impact. This bottom row is really in the same kind of timeline. We've seen a lot of new vendors, a lot of new tool sets, a lot of new technology, existing vendors, existing kind of OEMs, adding in very specific cybersecurity capabilities and controls that didn't used to be in these products. So this is an area where these additional capabilities and additional maturity are actually helping, and it's kind of lowering the risk in those areas if asset owners and operators are taking those tools, technologies, training their teams, adopting them and implementing them. It is definitely a trend that will help in the battle. As we talk about additional controls and some of these things to manage the risk and mitigate, one of the great frameworks that a number of people would be familiar with is kind of the CIS 20 critical controls. As just from a familiarity perspective, the basics, the foundational and the organizational controls. If you're on the IT side, definitely kind of look to this set of controls so you can start somewhere, prioritize on the areas where you believe you have the greatest deficiencies, and map it to your operating environments where you can, in an effort to kind of help move down that path. Consider these controls and then consider kind of your environments that you're operating in. Certainly the way they're organized now across the basic, the foundational, and the organization, you would absolutely kind of look to those in that order. If you're at the top of this organization or this network architecture, from the external networks, business environments, and corporate environments, starting with the basic, moving down into the foundation, and ultimately looking into the organizational controls. That is kind of the approach you would want to take. Similarly, in the DMZ section of this network architecture, as you move down into the supervisory controls, and that's what we're going to be focusing on for this webcast, you may want to mix and match some of these basic CIS controls, some of the foundational controls in the organization, or you'll even see that various standards frameworks have already done that, where they've taken the things that really matter within an operational technology environment. And that's where you'll see some of those regulations and standards kind of in the supervisory control element, where you need to really, really focus on the things that have the greatest impact to the operating environment from a real-time perspective, and could potentially cause some level of operational effect. Moving down into these various control elements and the industrial control systems, industrial control protocols, the various types of communication infrastructure, and down into the sensor and actuator level, you're really getting to a point where there's still kind of a lack of visibility from a network perspective, a lack of visibility for what types of assets you own and how you're managing them and how you operate. So some of these standards and some of these frameworks and some of these controls, in a lot of cases, the requirements or the guidance works sort of well within the supervisory control element level. And as you move down into the control element and the sensor and actuator levels, you're really looking for tools and technology and capabilities that will assist you in improving your security, improving your visibility, and performing some asset management down in that space. As we kind of look to a map that we talk about quite often within operational technology asset owner environments, we say if you have kind of $1 to spend on cybersecurity, or hopefully $1 million to spend on cybersecurity, where should you prioritize it? We would generally tend to focus on two key areas from a workforce perspective and knowing your assets, knowing the hardware, knowing the software, and understanding the configuration. Those two elements, if you're doing them well across your operational technology environment, you are definitely putting yourself in a position where if there was a successful attack, you would have the best chance of minimizing the effect of that successful attack. As you continue to move to the right on this scale, you're moving down a path of trying to prevent as many kind of common types of attack or non-targeted attacks, but ultimately all the way to the right, if you're competing against a well-funded, capable adversary that is targeting your organization and they do have a successful attack, ultimately you will be relying on your recover capabilities and your restoration capabilities. But all of these things are built on your people knowing their tools, knowing their technology, being knowledgeable in the space, and knowing what assets, hardware, software, and current configurations that they are trying to recover to. So these two things are key in the mission that we often teach across our courseware within the industrial control system community. And specifically for this webcast, as we move forward, these are two kind of the inventory components and asset management. These are key areas that we'll be talking about. The last slide that I'll cover before I turn this over to Bob is kind of an effort where we've worked through the 20 critical controls. If you were only focused on kind of an OT environment, how would you prioritize those? And across these, the first, second, and third are truly the same, no matter what, from the perspective of IT or OT. In all cases, you have to have a solid understanding of what devices and what cyber-enabled equipment is in scope, the software that is running, including OS and firmware, and then how that system, that device, is supposed to be configured, how it's supposed to be operated, and securing it down so that it's performing what it needs for operational purposes only. All additional kind of ports and services or capabilities of that device being disabled if they are not needed for the operating environment that they're there to support. The remaining items kind of controlling network access, some level of boundary defense, as physical security and electronic security are both share an important role, and ultimately the incident response and management to an event if one were to occur. So this is kind of a view of what this would look like across an OT environment, specifically kind of shuffling the deck on the CIS controls for this type of environment. And as we turn over to Bob, we're going to focus more on kind of the top three items here and the capabilities of Sentryo, and as well as Michael coming on to talk from an AWC perspective on what they've seen in implementations and lessons learned in the field as well. So with that, Bob, I will be turning over to you, and you should have mouse control.
I believe I do. Tim, thank you so much. And as Tim said, thank you for all the attendees taking the time to join us today. I want to provide a little bit of background on Sentryo as a company. This presentation, we're not here to sell you a product today. We want to talk about a service that we're offering that we think might have value to people on this call, to the industry generally. And it's funny, Tim, we were just talking before the call, the two categories you mentioned, workforce and inventory. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday where between IT and OT cybersecurity, there are currently 300,000 plus job openings in the United States, plus God knows in the rest of the world. I can't help with workforce. Sorry, that's but those of you who are in this area, you're in a hot area, so more power to you. We certainly can talk about the inventory asset part of it. So I'm with a company called Sentryo. We are and continue to be an innovative leader in the emerging OT cybersecurity market. Founded in 2014, offices in the U.S. and in Europe. Through partners, we have a presence throughout the world, protecting hundreds of thousands of industrial devices. We were selected by Gartner as their OT vendor in 2018, which we're always glad to get those kind of accolades. So our mission statement is to help industrial organizations with continuity, resilience, and safety of their operations by protecting their ICS systems against cyber risks. As an offshoot of that, not only are we protecting against cyber risk, but we generally are also protecting against things like somebody doing PLC programming who is overtired, undertrained, or malicious. So there are other benefits in addition to the cyber protection for solutions like what we were talking about today. And we sell ICS supervision around the world successfully. The focus of this webinar is a service option, but it is important to point out that this service offering is based on an innovative category-leading product. So we're compatible with all major OT platforms. Most of you on the call would know that these are proprietary in the OT space versus IP-based in the IT security space. We have significant partnership with companies like AWC, who's joining us on this call, Thales, PwC, Schneider. We have a very, very strong partnership with Siemens. In fact, if you buy the Siemens anomaly detection product from their catalog, that's our product, white labeled by them. And we go across all vertical markets. The OT cybersecurity space, the innovative, more mature companies have been from where Tim came from, the utility, energy kind of spaces, where regulatory requirements and a true risk was present earlier than maybe in some of the smaller manufacturing space. But we're involved with nuclear, manufacturing, car, chemical, petrochemical, transportation in the railway space. We're involved in the energy, oil production and delivery, both natural gas. We're involved with oil platforms floating off of the coast in a variety of countries. So for this presentation, though, I'm not trying to sell you a product. If anybody on the call wants to buy one, we have a great product we'll sell it to you. We want to talk about today, though, in working with companies for the last 5 years around the world in this industrial space, we've noticed certain trends that we believe, when we combine them together, it prompted us to provide a new service. I'm sure, depending on where you are in terms of your evaluating, looking at, and implementing OT cybersecurity, you hear messages in the trade press and the industry, regulatory bodies, the government, depending on what industry you're in, that your industrial environment's at risk and you better do something about it. In many cases, there have been you've had an attack of some kind. If you ask Norsk Hydro, who just had to state that they were going to have a $52 million quarterly loss, they're one of the leaders in aluminum production, their upper management is very concerned about OT cybersecurity. So we're seeing a lot of pressure in organizations down to the plant industrial level saying, what are we doing about industrial cybersecurity? But where do you start? One more thing I'd mention on the side, I'm not sure Tim may agree with this. I also see an acceleration issue that's hitting us hard in the OT space, and that is, in the IT space, the evolution of protections kind of came along with the evolution of attacks. There was kind of almost a parity. You blow up something with dynamite, and I come back with plastic explosive, because you build a bigger safe. In the OT world, all of a sudden, we're connecting these industrial environments, and the IT cyber attacks that were used against the IT world, developed over the last 15 to 20 years, are now launched directly at that OT space, which is now connected. So we don't have the luxury of the startup that we had in the IT security space. So one challenge is you don't know what you don't know. You're getting pressure to do something. You suspect that you may have exposures, but what are those exposures? How do you know exactly what they are? How do you ask for budget or staff if you have no insight into what your risk exposure is? How do you gain visibility into your network risk posture? And of course, if the first thing is, as Tim mentioned, is an important aspect, understanding your assets. How do you started and get a handle on that. So what would you like to know? Through a survey of our customers, prospects, people in the industry, how many devices are on your industrial network? What are the granular details about each of these? And I know everyone we meet with, they have a spreadsheet of some kind because somebody walked around sometime in the last 2 or 3 years with a clipboard and they made notes on all the devices they had and what firmware version they were at the last time they checked, and vendor's name, project, TCP/IP addresses, etc. But is it current? Is it accurate? Most of our clients, before they use a technology like ours, would say no. What connects to what? Can I see this on some kind of logical map? Are there connections to the outside world? 100% of the time when we go into a customer site and do a POC or an install, we find devices that they didn't have registered. They may or may not have known they existed. And they find connections between devices and internally, between zones internally and externally they didn't know existed. Are there vulnerabilities and weak spots? If we talk to the average customer we're talking about doing a project with, can you give me a list of where you are with firmware and which devices need updates right now? They almost never would have that right in front of them. So as Tim mentioned, you can't control your risk without visibility. What device is at this IP address? Typical weaknesses. Everybody's using default credentials that came out of the box. Somebody's making DNS queries to Russia, et cetera. People are, 30–40% of organizations we talk to are still using XP. Security patches aren't installed, et cetera. So the other question is, where do I start? What is my next step? Typical next step is maybe bring in a big security company, bring in a big consulting company, bring in a team of people, live on site for 3 months, quite expensive, very resource intensive, both on their side and your side. One thing we notice, wherever you are in your quest to identify next steps, you're not alone. We were at the ICS Atlanta conference as a sponsor in October of 2018. On the floor of that conference, there was one of the largest automakers in the world, one of the top 3 pharma companies in the world, a building products company. They were at that show specifically to wander around and try to get a handle on what options do we have, what should we ask, what vendors should we talk to. It's tricky. Where do we start? You can start bringing in vendors. We all love that, but how do you know which ones you can start by choosing? You could start doing a POC. What would the list of requirements be? And you could hire OT cybersecurity staff. It may be premature, and as I mentioned earlier, there are 300,000 openings you're competing with. So as a result, we've developed what we call our Sentryo Assessment Service. We have a unique comprehensive analysis of your industrial environment to provide information that can act as your foundation to move forward with a plan for OT cybersecurity. We combine our industry-leading cybersecurity technology, called ICF CyberVision, with industrial knowledge and experience of our key partners to deliver this solution. So very quickly and easily, we get information from your industrial environment, and then through our partners like AWC, they provide their decades and decades of experience, understanding of industrial systems to give you an assessment report. It's quick, it's passive, it's low cost, and you get a comprehensive report that you can then build from. So the assessment service delivers an automated asset inventory report, including mapping, vulnerability detection, I'll talk a bit more about that, maps of all your communications internally and externally, actionable insights into your security posture and what steps you should take, and comprehensive reports. So what are the benefits? It's quick, low cost, and fully passive. We do an assessment using, in most cases, a sensor, a physical sensor or a software sensor that is completely passive. No data can move from our side to your side. We're talking about something that takes weeks, not months. You get a comprehensive assessment report. I mentioned no impact on the OT network. very detailed asset inventory. We have a mapping of all your devices, all the connections, and a variety of ways for you to slice and dice that I'll show you an example of. All communication flows, including what they go to, what's moving, who's making changes to PLCs, etc. Detailed network posture. We have a team of people, and it's growing. We're actually selling that as a service now to various government agencies and things. Their job is to understand what vulnerabilities your systems might have, and they have a database of that based on Siemens firmware requirements or Rockwell's firmware requirements and updates, and also known CV vulnerabilities, and we can match those. So a typical, we're going to do a POC, medium-sized plant. At the end of that POC, we'll come back to the client and go, okay, we found 18 devices with an aggregate of 185 vulnerabilities that need to be looked at and then prioritized in terms of how you're going to deal with them. There are multiple engagement options. What we're talking about here primarily is a one-time assessment. AWC comes in, using our tool and their experience, builds a report. But for example, there's an AWC client right now they're doing this for. They want to do an assessment now. And now they're oil rigs, so they've got their own set of unique challenges, like how do I get there? I've got to jump on a helicopter. I've got to go out to the rig. I do a scan, come back and do the analysis. In their case, they want to do a follow-up next year and then compare changes from what they learned this year and the fixes they've done and the changes they've done, compare that a year. Then their goal is to move that to monthly and then move it to real time. So we can do it at an interval. You can be one time and you'll learn a lot from that, or you can do it at some interval basis. Obviously, over time, in many people's cases, the goal is to do real-time monitoring of my industrial environment. That's up to you. What we're talking about here, though, is getting that baseline information initially, and you can decide how to build a plan going forward from that. We talk to a lot of clients who, you know, we have a client we're working with now rolling out. They have 102 plants. And we have this vision of, okay, put our stuff in and monitor everything real time. And the head of that project came back to me and said, you know, Bob, if I could scan every plant once a month right now, that would give me such a huge advantage over where I am. We can move to real time sometime down the road. So there's, you know, the vision for how you want to do all these things. Then there's the practical reality of what can you do today to give yourself more value. So a one-time assessment is what we're primarily talking about today, but I wanted to make sure you knew there were some other options. It's important to point out that we have a wonderful tool, but that tool needs to be applied by experienced experts. Partners of ours like Thales and PwC, A Solutions, Orange, and AWC, one of our strongest partnerships here in North America. They've been in the industrial automation control system industry for 54 years. They're one of the world's largest, maybe the world's largest Siemens local business partner. They have 400 dedicated technical resources, and they're a trusted resource in oil and gas, especially chemical, pulp and paper, water treatment, biotech, pharma, and more. 10,000 active customers with a variety of skill sets that can bring real value to the information that our product allows them to analyze. So I wanted to give you some examples of, okay, so we do our assessment, we put our sensor on your industrial network. What do we learn from passively looking at network traffic and bring that back? What do we learn from that? And I want you, this is just a grain of sand in a beach of data. But I want to give you a sampling of the kind of information AWC will have to generate a report for you. So our system automatically maps all industrial communication flows and assets. So we identify all relationships between assets. We view the IP and OT traffic, so we understand the proprietary protocols of all the major and many of the minor device suppliers to whatever industry you're in. We obviously can quickly spot anomalies and malfunctions, connections that shouldn't be happening, and we can look at this information over a period of time. It could be a very short data capture, or it could be multiple days, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. It's also important to point out that we have a lot of clients with a lot of devices. If you look at the map on the left, that's not going to be very helpful at first glance. We use AI to convert that data we've gathered into the logical connections of devices and groupings of devices. Then we have some other tools we use, and with AWC experience, we can put those into the exact groupings that your organization requires them to be in, and actually apply the names you would apply to them. So, you know, if it's winding station number 7, we can call that grouping wire station number 7. We also have a variety of what we call presets, ways for you to view that data in either one of our out-of-the-box options or your own custom options. So maybe you want to see only the Siemens devices. Maybe you want to see only PC type devices. Maybe you only want to see controllers. You can do all kinds of slicing and dicing on that data. So you see the view of that data that's important for you or important for one of your teams you have, so they can look at the data that's important to them. So AWC can slice and dice that and present it to you as part of their report in a way that brings you real value. So we have a variety of categories. This is just a small sampling, and you can make your own categories that you can have AWC and work with you on to slice and dice it in a way that brings more value to you. So one thing we do is, in Asset, we understand what these devices are and all their attributes. So we discover all the OT and IT equipment. We have detailed information about their software and hardware characteristics. We know what their functions are, properties are, who's doing the PLC programming, when they're doing it, do they have permission to do it. So some of these are just examples of doing some presets to apply to a very large data set. In this case, we're looking at Siemens only in this zone we're looking at. I want to point out that over here on the left-hand side, you can sort this same data based on the Purdue model. So in a lot of cases, especially for regulatory compliance, you may want to be looking at, okay, show me level 2 Purdue model. I want to look at those devices and analyze them. In this case, we're looking at these components that were sorted based on Siemens, and there were some protocol sorting we did also. And you can see what group they're in, what the activity, first activity we saw, last activity, their IP address, MAC address, tags, and we have a lot more information that we can do from there. Then, of course, you can also see a map of just this group of Siemens. We did a sort on Siemens and the 2 Siemens protocols, Profinet and S7. And again, you can still go back and sort further based on, like, for example, Purdue model or control system behavior or IT behavior as an example. So what you're seeing here is the connections between devices. If there were external connections, you would see those as well. And then you can also click on each one of these devices and get a lot more information. So now this list is, what are the activities, reading, writing, variables, etc., that went on between these mapped devices. So here we're seeing a line connecting them. Now we're seeing what was that interaction that happened between those devices. In many cases, it's reading and writing of variables. Now, in this case, what we've done is we've gone to this one device, this PLC S7400. And on the right, you can see some of the detail that we can provide on this device. And again, in this presentation, our limited time, I can only show you part of this, but we can look at flows, we can look at events, we can look at vulnerabilities in great detail, when would start CPU, stop CPU, etc. And if I click here for this detail, then I'll go down to the details on this device with things, for example, like model name, the full version, hardware version, serial number, IP address, firmware version, etc. A lot of detailed information, and again, this is just a sample that we can share. And then in this one, for the S7400 Station 1, we're showing just the activity for this PLC and what it interfaces with. So it's interfacing with the maintenance station, to this Dell PC, and this device. And then this is a list of all the communications that happened to and from this PLC within this defined time range. So, and again, I know there's a lot of small detail here, but I'm just trying to give you a sample. Multiply this by a very large multiplier of the detail that AWC has then to mine to build this assessment report. I mentioned threat intelligence, so we have a built-in vulnerability database that is updated on a regular real-time basis, and it tracks information across a variety of different device aspects. It's important to point out that we not only track what the vulnerability was, but also a detailed description, and then we can work with you, AWC can work with you to have a score for that. So you go after, when you're looking at a problem, if AWC comes back and says, you've got these 50 devices with 190 vulnerabilities, you can stack rank which ones are we going after. We also provide a solution, either maybe recommended by Rockwell or Siemens or your provider, or by, if it's a CVE, by an industry type recommendation. We can, as part of the report, generate a whole range of activity inventory and vulnerability reports, layer after layer of these reports based on what would be high risk areas, and important to give you an assessment of where you stand from a vulnerability perspective. Now, this is only applicable if you have more than one assessment. If we do one assessment, then there's no baseline. If you do, as AWC's offshore oil rig company does, or many of our other clients, if they do more than one scan, then an assessment report, then what we're going to do is we establish a baseline that we compare against. And that's about, let's say you do a number of changes, you want to compare baseline before the changes, after the changes. So you can also look at, in the baseline changes, is there anything that's bad? Did a person program a PLC at a time they shouldn't have? Did someone who shouldn't have a right to do something? Did a system come online that we don't have in our records and shouldn't be there? Was there a connection to the outside that we didn't know existed? So the anomaly detection is very interesting if you do more than one scan and assessment. So just a couple quick comments on how does AWC use our tool as part of their assessment. The simplest part is they come on after some planning with you. They come on your site. They use either hardware or software scanning. They attach to your network in a very safe way and passively look at the data and then bring it back to AWC for analysis. So if they use our hardware sensor, there's nothing to configure. They just attach it through a switch on your side. They can also do a PCAP capture using a tool like Wireshark and capture data through a PC. It's pretty straightforward. If you are using a hardware sensor, we provide, AWC has in stock a variety of sensors that they can bring in, a Sensor 7. This is attractive because it has a data diode which absolutely guarantees nothing can move from our side, the AWC side, onto your network. We also can run our sensor app on a variety of other industry devices you may already have, or as we mentioned, you can run it as a application on a PC. You do deep packet inspection, and we have the flexibility where AWC can come to the appropriate place in your industrial network environment to attach in one or more places on your network to gather the data they need for the report. And here's just a quick example of where we could attach a Sensor 7 right here on your network, or we could do one down here at the PLC level. You can attach in a variety of places. The key is, can we see the parts of your industrial network that are important for you to have as part of the assessment? So that's kind of background on the tool that we're suggesting that AWC use with you for this analysis. But as I mentioned, we have to have partners like AWC to have this come together to bring you real value. So I want to thank Michael Thompson for joining us today from AWC, so he can tell us more about how AWC is using and would use our tool along with their experience and expertise to provide you actionable insight into your industrial environment. So Michael, if you don't mind.
No problem. Hey now, this is Michael Thompson. So I'm the Chief Engineering and Technology Officer for AWC Inc. And I've got to say, we looked at a lot of these tools before we decided to move forward with Sentryo. And based on our relationship and what we've done with them so far, we've made the absolute right choice. So I spent most of my career as an end user, so I'm really familiar with a lot of the challenges you guys are seeing out there trying to operate and run the plant or facility. I've been in the ICS cybersecurity industry since 2009 when I worked for a large gas and electric company out east. It was there that my eyes were open for the first time during a SCADA modernization effort that I found that the gas distribution pressure control system was practically unsecured. I mean, you could actually just dial into the pressure control system and if you were so inclined, make changes. That was kind of shocking to me. It wasn't even exactly, security by obscurity. It was even less than that. Needless to say, a lot's changed since then. I spent a good bit of time as the Cybersecurity Assessment team lead at one of the US's largest nuclear providers, and I helped to drive their nuclear cybersecurity program before I joined Koch Industries. And I took on a role there as the Director of Industrial Control System Resilience. They let us make up our own titles at Koch, so that was what I decided to call myself. Now, needless to say, I've got some experience dealing with threats and attacks and have learned some valuable lessons along the way that I plan to share here today. However, I figured I'd start with why you should consider us at AWC when partaking in this assessment effort. So, who are we? What do we do? And why should you look to us for help? AWC, at its heart, is an industrial control system automation system company. We've been at this since 1965, and we have more than 10,000 active clients, as Robert spoke about earlier, across pretty much all industries. If there's something automated, we're there. We're in just about every industry that uses automation. We pride ourselves on being the tip of the spear when it comes to advances in the automation industry. And we feel it's our responsibility to take the bumps and bruises so our clients don't have to. I'm a big history buff, so I like to quote famous people. Otto von Bismarck once stated, "Only a fool learns from his own mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others." And so, we're the ones that are there trying to make those mistakes so you don't have to. So this has given us a reputation in the industrial control system industry of being a trusted resource. For most of our clients, we're the first people to call when they have an automation need. It was because of this that we first saw the need to start providing ICS cybersecurity assistance. We found ourselves getting asked more and more about ICS cybersecurity, so we built a team to address this. So what makes us a trusted resource is that we understand the entire automation ecosystem. The Germans, they're real good with words that have no English translation. And one that I particularly love is the word Weltanschauung. And it's basically a comprehensive conception or apprehension of the world, especially from a specific point of view. We thoroughly understand the ICS landscape. It's what we do. It's in our DNA. We aren't IT guys that picked up ICS skills. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not who we are. Our core competencies is what gives us our competitive advantage, our comparative advantage in this landscape. So as you can see here, we have a wealth of experience in the industrial control and automation space. We've been specifying and designing these systems since 1965. As the technology evolved, we kept pace. And if you're going to be designing and specifying control systems, you better have a good grasp of industrial networking to tie it all together, which brings me to my next point here. So as the industry matured, we saw the need for functional safety, and we met the challenge and became experts in the field of functional safety engineering. We currently maintain a staff of several certified functional safety engineers. And this is important because plant security and safety are now inextricably linked. The plant cannot be safe if it's not first secure. I'm a big believer in this, and I'm starting to hear this more and more in the industry, and I couldn't agree more. With that said, if you're a PSM covered plant and you abide by ISA 84 or IEC 61511, IEC 61511 edition 2 now has language specifically calling out the need to consider cybersecurity for the safety instrumented system. So, of course, if you're dealing with automation, you're likely to need instrumentation as well. We're experts in specifying and selecting instrumentation for automation systems. And for those of you who know Mr. Joe Weiss, This is often an overlooked area in the cybersecurity landscape. Another area that we focus on is field services. We know how to go into the plant and operate without shutting it down. So this is just another avenue that we are very highly skilled at. So all of this together gives us a good foundation to leverage our industrial control system cybersecurity capabilities. Our cybersecurity teams has decades of experience assessing, securing, and auditing industrial control systems. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the lessons we've learned over the years here. And so one of the best lessons that I can tell anyone, and something that no matter where I go, we always see the same thing. You need to understand the boundaries and interfaces of your systems. You need an assessment. I hate to be the cliched guy quoting Sun Tzu, but it's true. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. To be perfectly honest, I'm more of a Clausewitz guy, but it's still true. You need to understand what you're defending. An assessment will help with this understanding. Number two is security is an emergent property that arises from the interaction of several things. You can't just go to the vendor and order an extra serving of safety or security, though they'll try to sell it to you, no doubt. Security is something that comes as multiple things together interact. Like I said, it's an emergent property. Number three, security should not be baked in. It should be baked in and not bolted on whenever possible. Now, there's always exceptions. We can't always have what we want, and you got to go to war with the army that you have and not the army that you want a lot of times. But the fact of the matter is that you definitely want to consider security as early on in the design process as possible. One of the things we bring is that when helping to design these systems, if we're brought in early, we can leverage some of the learnings we had from our functional safety days. One of the best things that we can bring is the concept of inherently safer design. So in the functional safety world, rather than use, say, a dangerous chemical, we would use a less dangerous chemical that could still do the job. We call this inherently safer design. And what this does is it allows us to not have to deal with the possible explosion that comes about from the volatile chemical that we would have used by using the less hazardous one in its place. The translation to cybersecurity is if there's a potential to attack a transmitter wirelessly, perhaps we should look to buy a transmitter without that wireless capability, unless needed, of course. So number four, the plant is not safe if it's not secure. By now, we've all heard of the Triton, the Trisis attack on the safety instrumented system in the Middle East back in 2017. The genie is now effectively out of the bottle. And number six, just because the threat is old doesn't mean it can't still hurt you. A dead rattlesnake can still bite you. And I've seen more damage from old threats than 0 days, to be perfectly honest. I've seen companies still battling to this day in 2019, the Conficker virus, and that came out 11 years ago. It's just something that it tends to linger, especially in the industrial control systems cybersecurity landscape where ICS platforms aren't often updated. So what can we do for you? So here at AWC, as a partner to Sentryo, we can provide a cybersecurity assessment leveraging the Sentryo platform. One of the differentiators here is that we come in, perform the assessment, and leave, taking all of our stuff with us. No lingering, no subscriptions necessarily for that one-time service, and no leaving equipment installed. We can analyze the results, provide the assessment, and provide you with actionable information without trying to cloud your judgment with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We bring real-world experience in, and we'll help you figure out a way to get through whatever issue you're in. If vulnerabilities are found, we can help with your team to provide practical advice to help you better secure your plant. Just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should or have to do something. You could find a vulnerability, and there may be other ways to remediate it without necessarily having to shut the plant down and do a patch. Ultimately, in order to get where you're going on this journey, you need to orient yourself and know where you're at. So having an assessment in place is a critical step early on. And with that, I will spare you any future slides here, and I keep mine short, 4 or 5 slides. So that's all I got, guys.
Thank you very much. Before you put yourself on mute, I'm going to leave this slide up, and I have a couple of questions that have been queuing up. Appreciate the presentation from both both of you. I'm going to start with a question for Michael while we have you still in control and unmuted. This is a couple of questions, but I think they all kind of lean towards the same thing. As I'll try to summarize, as you're going into a facility to do kind of this type of an assessment work, in order to assess the vulnerabilities on these various industrial control system devices, can you describe kind of the nature of the scans that are being run and how you're using the tool? And specifically, kind of a follow-on to that from the same individual is, do you recommend performing pen tests within a industrial control system or operational environment?
Yeah, under very, very controlled circumstances should you do pen testing. And I would say you want to do it as close to a scheduled shutdown as possible. I always say on the Mike Thompson fragility scale, and has anyone ever heard me talk before, they've heard me say this before, the process control network is somewhere between that of a butterfly's wings and a bubble. So it's not exactly the most hardy thing in the world. So penetration testing tends to do odd things to the process control network. And I don't think you want your plant manager to, have a coronary when you say you're going to pen test. So to the first part of that question, I would say it depends. So we like to do these things. One of the things we're trying to do now is leverage turnarounds and shutdowns. So we would like to come in approximately a week or several days prior to your turnaround to kind of get a good baseline. We like to come in and passively sniff what's going on your operation under normal circumstances in a way that won't impact your operation. And then when you go down to do your scheduled maintenance, it gives you an opportunity to then take that opportunity to patch or do whatever has to be done during that scheduled outage time. And then when you come back up, we do another scan to make sure everything looks good. That's one of the strategies we're looking to employ. The reality of it is long ago, I was briefed by the FBI, and they said the average intruder spends about 160 or more days lingering on your site. So they're doing this. They're kind of laying in wait. When you see people that are taking over industrial control systems and everything in the movies, that's essentially what it is. It's in the movies. If they were going to move hastily, chances are they would trip the system and bring, hopefully, if you engineered your plant in the right way, to a safe state. So the guys that are doing this, that are really intent on doing harm, they're lingering, they're waiting. And if you're doing some assessments and strategically looking into what's going on in your system, you can catch them.
That's great. Thank you, Michael.
Hey, Michael, this is Bob.
Yes, sir.
If you look at like your oil rig client, though, they're hypersensitive about any kind of intrusion on their network. And because of the passive nature of the scanning, you can still do that at any time, right? You don't have to wait for a shutdown or some other time. You're going to kind of go when the helicopter is scheduled. Yes,
sir. You are absolutely correct. In that particular client's case, yeah, that's one of the beauties of the Sentryo product, and one of the reasons we selected it. It gives you that ability to do all this passively. So, I mean, fantastic.
So the product supports out of the box the most major SIM on the market. So QRadar, Splunk, ArcSight are supported. We even have a template for QRadar specifically. And also we have a REST API allowing the product to connect with an inventory asset product like ServiceNow.
Okay, I think we're going to have to stop there, and I'll turn this back over to Carol, but I just want to thank all the attendees, the presenters, and even the last gentleman who was brought in and didn't get didn't get announced. We appreciate everybody's help. And we apologize for the audio problems. Carol, are you still there?
Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thanks, Tim. I did receive an alert from GoToWebinar that there's audio issues across the board. Thank you so much, Tim, Michael, and Bob, and Face for your great presentation, and to Sentryo for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.